Welcome to the Muse Writers Center. I want to thank you for joining us today. We're very excited to hear from Amanda Gomez. She's going to share her work from her new chapbook. Amanda's been with us for a very long time as a friend, as a teacher. She graduated from ODU, so it's really exciting to be able to celebrate the release of her new chapbook here. Before we get started, I would like to tell you about the Muse Writers Center. We are one of the largest literary centers in the country. We offer online and in-person creative writing classes of all genres for all levels and all ages. Our new fall schedule has been released. It's out there. There's still lots of classes to sign up for. So check out the-muse.org for all of the online classes that are being offered. We also offer tuition assistance for anyone who needs it. We do not turn anyone away. We gave away almost $30,000 in tuition assistance last year because we don't want anything getting in the way of someone who wants to learn to write and creatively express themselves. We need that more than ever now. We also offer hundreds of free literary events a year, and we're doing that online now, just like this: teacher readings, book launches, writing clubs, and so much more. Keep checking back to the website, the events section. We're really excited because we just launched a series of events called Diversity 2020, Dynamic Voices for Change. You could still view the kickoff event, which Amanda was a part of, which was really awesome. Great poets. And the Spotlight event, which was amazing too. They're both on YouTube, Facebook, and also our website. All you have to do is go to the-muse.org and then hit the events tab, and you'll see Diversity 2020. Hit that tab, and you see all the events coming up. Over the next 3 weekends in November, the first 3 weekends of November, we have about 6 live streaming events of all kinds. I will let you check it out to see what we're offering. They're all free, but we are accepting sponsorships for those. So if you want to sponsor an event or just donate to the Muse, you can find out everything you need at the-muse.org. Okay, so I'd like to have one quick announcement about our live streaming readings. All work read from the readers is their original work unless otherwise noted. It is owned by the reader unless otherwise noted. Some of the work here today is published or will be published on print or online. Some of the work may be unpublished. The live stream today is in no way a publication of unpublished work. And I'm going to start out by introducing Amanda Gomez. Amanda Gomez is a Latinx poet from Norfolk, Virginia, where she received her MFA in poetry at Old Dominion University. Some of her poems have appeared in Nimrod International Journal, North American Review, PANK, Tupelo Quarterly, and Writers Resist. And we are celebrating the release of her first chapbook, Wasting Disease, which is going to be ready very soon. And you can order that. It's from Finishing Line Press. And make sure that you check that out. You can pre-order too, I believe. And as I mentioned before, we know Amanda Gomez very well here at the Muse, and we are so proud of her releasing this book and so excited that she decided to share it with us and the Muse community. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Amanda Gomez. All right.
Well, thank you, Sean, for introducing me. And I want to thank Michael and everyone at the Muse, everyone who participates at the Muse, takes classes at the Muse, supports the Muse. This is like really special for me. I never thought this day would come, and it's just really exciting to share it with everyone at the Muse. And for those who are watching, also thank you, because this is, your time. I thought I would start about talking about the book before like reading a poem. So part of the collection came from my graduate thesis, and then part of it came from poems I was writing after I graduated from ODU. And the book title is called Wasting Disease. And at the time I was putting the book together, I was writing this poem about starfish, and it felt like it had absolutely nothing to do with anything I was writing or this collection of poems. And I really hated this poem because it just wasn't coming together, and I didn't know what this poem was supposed to be. And at some point, I thought back to one of the first poems I had ever read in undergrad. It was from a book of Appalachian women writers, and there was a Native American writer named Mary Lou Awiakta, and she had a poem called Women Die Like Trees. And I remember that poem, and I started thinking of my starfish poem, and I thought, I need to change this poem and kind of make it an homage to her, because she was one of the first poets I had read that I really fell in love with. So before I start, I actually want to read her poem first, because I feel like, you know, you can see where that inspiration comes from if we read her first, and she's just so good. So this poem was called "Women Die Like Trees." Women die like trees, limb by limb, as strain of bearing shade and fruit drains sap from branch and stem, and weight of ice with wrench of wind splits the heart, loosens grip of roots until the tree falls with a sigh, unheard except by those nearby, to lie, mossing, moldering, to a certain softness underfoot, the matrix of new life and leaves. No flag is furled, no cadence beats, no bugle sounds for deaths like these, as limb by limb, women die like trees. And I remember reading that poem and I thought, wow, just how beautiful the imagery. And I thought of my collection, and I was writing a lot about girlhood and growing up and loss of innocence. And I wanted that kind of poem for girls, not just for women. Like, what happens to girls who are overly sexualized? What kinds of girls get overly sexualized? What is this loss of innocence? And reclaiming this kind of innocence? Is it just recycling all this kind of stuff? So I wanted that kind of poem, but for girls. So I do borrow the lines limb by limb, and I say after Mary Lou Awayakta. So this is the poem Wasting Disease, which is the title of the chapbook. Wasting Disease, after Mary Lou Awayakta. Little girls dissolve like starfish, their waterlogged limbs sprawled across the shoreline. It's difficult to tell which are sand flecks and which the remnants of skin. It's a horror show, scientists say. First, white lesions appear, then limb by limb, their bodies turn limp. Sometimes an arm twists and falls. On rare occasion, bodies melt into a kind of paste. I guess what I'm saying is, every girl learns to disintegrate. So that is the first poem of the collection. And then I'll read this next poem. It's a little further in the book. And this is called Dreaming of Oriana Wright. And it's based off of 60 Minutes episode. And I kind of have this obsession with true crime. And so kind of getting at this idea of how a lot of crime shows really fantasize about female death. And this idea of that Dreaming of Oriana Wright. Growing up, my best friend's mom told us stories about wife-beating husbands, strangled corpses, and child abductions. It didn't help much either her husband was a cop. He kept her up to date with the latest crime patterns where we lived. Always have your keys in hand when walking to the car, she'd say. Or, if you're in a bad part of town stopped at a red light, don't wait for it to turn green, just drive through. You're a sitting duck if not. But the craziest advice, was when she told us that if a man ever wrangled us into his car, to rip off a button, assuming we had one, and put it in the ignition. That way the key wouldn't fit, assuming we wouldn't be tied up or locked up in the trunk, assuming the button fit the slot. So naturally, when I left home, I binge watched shows like Law and Order SVU and Snapped. One night, lying on the couch, I caught a 60 Minutes episode about a Tinder date gone wrong. Oriana Wright, a girl my age, was trapped on a 14th floor balcony. Trying to escape her date, she attempted to climb over the rail, reach the neighbor below, but drunk, she slipped and fell. Technically, yes, he didn't kill her. But if that's the last resort to safety, it might as well be murder. The best part, he recorded the whole entire night. His phone tucked in his chest pocket. When asked by the reporter why he would do such a thing, he said, I can't remember what happens when I drink. I was protecting myself in case she made a false claim of rape. What he doesn't say, he gave her a red necklace with his hands. At the morgue, they found a snip of her jeans lodged in her skull, evidence her body bent in half, as if she hugged herself midair to reach the safest place she could before death. So at the same time, I was writing a lot of poems about West Side Story because I was intrigued in the idea of, yes, what happens when girls lose innocence, and then what kinds of girls lose their innocence or are thought to have lost their innocence. And West Side Story was a really important movie for me because I'm half Puerto Rican, and it was the first time I felt like, oh wow, there's Puerto Ricans, in the TV. And but I always loved Anita, but what I hated was she never showed up at the end. What happened to her? So this poem is called Grind. West Side Story, 1961, for Rita Moreno, who plays Anita. In the drugstore taunting scene, before Anita lies about Maria's death, we forget Rita's painted face. Forget in this movie, Puerto Ricans are only dark-skinned. We're silent. Run, we think, hoping she'll escape as the boys cat-like claw her skirt, grind her back against cement, leaping around her legs as fast as light bulbs burn out. That they will rape her is understood, not just because she's had sex or is thought to be oversexed, but that some women were built as fodder for violence, their innocence taken hostage. Later, Rita would admit how the past came knocking at her throat, how it bruised her soul, how she too was almost raped. I was filled with every terrible rage, she says, when I said the line, "Don't you dare touch me." Her jaw, a sharp arrangement of bone as if to say, this is the hurt we sew inside our ribs, cut-worked, patterned, a trauma set in place. Next poem is called Autopsy of My Mother. And so I think about, okay, girls losing their innocence, and then what happens when this becomes a generational thing, like, girls robbed of their innocence, robbed of their mothers, robbed of their grandmothers, kind of idea of this becomes a generational pattern. So this is called Autopsy of My Mother. In the dream when my mother dies, I am the coroner wheeling her into the exam room to split her chest. I cut a Y-shaped slit that curves underneath her breast, separate tissue and skin, exposing the ribs the way a parent might pull back the covers before tucking the child in bed. Then, just like that, I crack her sternum, pluck her heart like a strawberry from its stem, clipping its cone-shaped body from the cursive stalk. Her pulse beating against my skin, a horde of horses scaling the ridges of my hands. Why is it I've dreamt this dream so many times? What holds my attention is not her body so much as my steady grip, my indifference towards the fact of her death. My mother, a stranger, a study in wounding. Starved for understanding, I continued to cut, drawing the scalpel from stomach to pubis region. I scoop what's left from the bowl of her pelvis until it's empty. I want to crawl into it as if it were a cradle where perhaps she'd hold me the way I always wished. I think I will read 2 more poems. Is that all right? All right, so this poem is called Offering. April and a morning shower blankets us, covers the shed out back where my father's fishing equipment is stored. On mornings like this, he searches beneath rain gutters for worms, loosening the earth with his hands, sifting it back and forth, collecting each body he finds in old crusted Tupperware for bait. Sometimes, when there isn't enough, he cuts them in half. How concerned he is ensuring there's enough. It's the silence he likes, the solace of being alone, standing on the bank, holding his fishing rod, watching nothing but the tug of the line against the current until a fish takes the bait. Most days, when he brings home a good catch, I like to watch my mother clean the fish. I stand by the kitchen sink, staring at her blood-covered hands as she tugs their head backwards, stripping the skin from its flesh, this new kind of nakedness. And this last poem is called On Heartbreak, and it is the last poem in the chapbook. And it's an ekphrastic poem, so it's a poem based on a work of art. And this is based on a picture of a performance artist, Marina Abramovic. I might have said her name wrong, but I hope not. And in this picture, she has a scorpion on her face, and it's almost as if her hair mirrors the scorpion's tail, this kind of curve in her hair. And you can look it up. The picture is called Portrait with a Scorpion. So this poem is called On Heartbreak. In Marina Abramovic's Portrait with a Scorpion, the arthropod spreads its leg across her face, extending from brow to nasal ridge in magnetic display. Despite the grayscale, the semblance between creature and woman is more likely than it seems. Her visage a mirror to this armored thing. It's hardly noticeable, her emotional state. The stark contrast so overwhelming. And how did she know the outcome? A venomous sting, the unlikelihood of a good ending. Will she survive or swell up, succumb to some inflammatory response? Will she purge her stomach, retch all night on her couch? Perhaps this is what we talk about when we talk about love. This disgusting, fantastic confusion. We love and fail despite our misgivings. Perhaps this is all. This document and its facing pages, a lesson in scars. Thank you very much.
That was wonderful, Amanda. Thanks for sharing all those poems with us. So just to remind everybody that that everyone out there on YouTube or on the website, the-muse.org, or Facebook, if you go to YouTube, you can ask questions. We have someone watching, so you can ask questions if you'd like to of Amanda. I will say right off the bat that we really enjoyed that. It's amazing work. Thank you again for sharing it. I'm going to start out with a question that I think, being someone who's a poetry student now, since I've been a writer of prose for longer than that, and I got my MFA in creative nonfiction. But then when I got to the Muse, I decided to take poetry classes, which I never really did before, and it opened up all this new world for me. So I guess being a poetry student, it's just like, when did you realize that poetry was going to be your best vehicle to express all of these I will say complex questions you have about all the world, but about womanhood, about everything. You know, it's just, it seems like poetry is the only way that you can express it like that, at least. So when was that discovery? Was it early, or was it a little later in your career as a poet?
I don't really know. When I was little, in first and second grade, we had a teacher who would like bookbind stuff for us, and I actually wrote lots of stories. Was not a good story writer, but I really liked stories. And then I started like writing poetry because I thought, no, I was writing poetry in my class. So I don't know if it was this weird thing to be different or not. But I always remembered feeling like, okay, I'm half Spanish, half white. Like, I feel like I can't talk Spanish well, and I feel like I can't talk English well. So I'm kind of, screwed. But poetry felt like this manageable place where it was okay to fail and experiment and play with sound, even though like I felt like my mouth stumbled around sound. So it was like I didn't feel like I was good, and I wanted to be good at language. And I just don't have the attention span for stories. And so like one page is enough for me to focus on. So maybe it started when I was younger and then progressed, and probably around like my first or second year in college, I started taking a creative writing class and realized like I really liked all the poetry prompts. So I would just write poetry prompts, but the more I wrote poetry, the more I fell in love with it. Hopefully that's a long way to answer that
No, that's
question.
great. Yeah, absolutely. I find that interesting. It's like sounds. It's usually something like that that draws people to the magic of poetry, is like a sound or imagery or something that you can do in poetry that you realize like, wait a second, I can do that. I can start there. And it just is kind of like an experience that everything comes out of you through the, through a sound or through something like that. And I think that's very appealing with the art form. Um, so let's talk about specifically one of your poems that you read, The Autopsy. Is it The Autopsy of Your Mother, or what's the
Yeah.
exact title? Yeah. I just find that really fascinating to go there with a dream of that, to explore that. And I don't know if how far you want to go into talking about how do you decide I am going to write about a dream? First of all, is it really an experience of having a dream like that and you decided to write it from there? Or when do you decide you're going to use that as a way to get through all of these things you're trying to explore there?
I wouldn't say that specifically was a dream, but a dream of like trying to understand my mother, and it felt like this like very or like cold kind of manner, and the autopsy felt like it echoed that kind of manner. Really, that poem started off as like a brain dump, and I had like a lot of different things happening in it, and this question of like why have I dreamed this dream so many times, I like really focused on that and really felt like I needed to focus on that autopsy imagery and draw it out, because it was originally was like this poem of like a moment in kindergarten and then lots of other images, and I
Mhm.
think I had Christmas lights in it, and I was like, well, that's kind of a jarring image and doesn't fit. So it started really as a brain dump. I actually use that poem when teaching revision, because if you saw the first poem and then you see this one, they're completely different.
And is that with a lot of your poems? Start out somewhere and go somewhere completely different, a lot of revisions, or?
A lot of them are. There's probably like five that I've only revised like once and thought I was done with it, but that rarely happens.
Mhm. Yeah, I think it's like going to decide that it's a dream, as in rather than actually just doing it, in person. I just think there's something about it being a dream that makes it even more meaningful and powerful, in my opinion. I have a question from Susan here. There's a lot of visceral imagery in your work and in the work of artists you've mentioned. Marina Abramovich, is that right? Did I say that right?
I think it's Abramovich, but
Abramovich, that
I
sounds
am
better.
probably saying it wrong too. So my
Abramovich,
apologies.
of course, uses her own body as art in very physical, often violent or painful ways. Is that sort of viscerality, which seems like it often borders on violence, something you've always associated with femininity and womanhood and girlhood?
Wait, can you read that again? Sorry, that was a really good.
So I'll start like Marina Abramovich often uses her own body as art in very physically, often violent or painful ways. Is that sort of viscerality, which seems like it often borders on violence, something you've always associated with femininity and
Oh,
womanhood
good
and
question.
girlhood?
Hmm. I don't think so, but I definitely feel like in this book, yes. And what's funny is I'm not seeing those connections until that question just popped up. Because I love Marina Abramovich, and I've followed her for a little while, and I forget a lot of the performances she's done, which have been really like where she gives her body over to people and will like offer them different things to do to her, and she will not intervene. Well, this was one performance art, and like it got really violent where people would almost hurt her or did hurt her. And I feel like, yeah, there's this tendency of like how things polar opposites are way more closer than we realize, like love and hate, but also like the sacred and the profane. And yeah, so I didn't think I intended it to be violence always associated with femininity and womanhood, but yeah, I think in this book I do associate it with that. But I think it's that question too of like, in celebrating things such as femininity, womanhood, sexuality, am I recycling these images I'm trying to critique? And I feel like that's a struggle that I had it with the chapbook, still have, and still working through. It's a question I keep having.
Mm-hmm.
I did not answer that question because that question was amazing, but I tried.
No, I think you did. And you've discovered things. That's what it's all about, right? That means you write good poetry if you can still discover things about it after it's written and almost discovered. Susan says, thank you. So also, I'd like to remind everybody watching that you can ask a question if you'd like to. Unfortunately, when this is over, you can ask a question in the chat on Facebook after you watch it later, and maybe Amanda might stumble upon it and answer it. But this is the time to ask if you'd like to. So I have a question in general about this is kind of going off topic because I know you got an MFA at ODU, and I would like to know how instrumental that was to creating this chapbook, like your guidance through ODU and influence from learning what you learned through an MFA program that might have helped you become a better poet or a poet that, because I don't know if this was your thesis or not, but it definitely, I've heard about you through the grapevine at writing through poetry, like, there's a lot of great poets that come out of that program. So I'm really interested in what you think from there to here, how you feel that worked out for you.
Oh, extremely beneficial. It's kind of embarrassing how little I read poetry before ODU, like super embarrassing. And also how little I knew of like Spanish poets, how little, of my own kind of literary history or literary family. That was really embarrassing coming there that way. And I feel like that's why I write a lot about movies in particular, because growing up, my parents didn't go to college. When I was home alone, I watched a lot of TV and movies. And so I kind of felt like my education was TV and movies. It was not books. I loved reading, but I was only well versed in what we read in English class, which was like a lot of like American lit or British lit. And so most of anything I knew about my own culture was through TV and through movies. And so I felt like that was my education for a really long time. So I felt like my MFA really helped me find writers that I wanted to emulate, find writers that I wanted to be part of, their family kind of, I guess. I wanted to be, I'd say like find your literary family, but yeah, and Louisa was amazing and Tim was amazing. I forgot to mention them in the beginning, but I thank them in the chat because like a lot of those poems would not be where they are without them. And so learning how to like edit and think about sound and just read and read and read and read and read. And so a lot of my writing has become kind of a conversation with writers that have experienced, because I felt like I didn't have that for so long. I had movies and TV, and that's why I still write about those, because I have a love relationship with those. But yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I kind of relate to that. When I started my MFA program, it's just the reading. I felt embarrassed because I wasn't an avid reader for the last 15 years of my life. I was a TV and film watcher, and then once I started reading, I realized that's how you get better at things, is by reading and workshopping and all that stuff. So I think that's really interesting. That's actually a question I have right now, is about, because there was one poem that you mentioned where you talked about Law and Order, which is a very cultural reference about TV. And I think it was Snapped, which is a TV show about about women that go off the edge or something like that, is very sensationalized. And I think that what are your feelings about poetry that goes into those terrains of pop culture and weave them in to poetry?
I feel like they should do it more often.
Yes, good.
Because I mean, like, yeah, we live, like, art, language evolves, art evolves. Why not? Yeah, so I'm all about it.
Yeah, I agree. And I remember you actually worked for the Muse for a little while, for briefly. And I remember when we went to a place and did that presentation for those seniors at Harbor's Edge. Do you remember
Yeah.
that? And that woman was at, you were saying how you didn't like, I forgot what it was, but she started asking you a question about vowels, like you were saying how you didn't like grammar wasn't the most important thing to you or something. And she
Yeah.
was like, well, what do you do if you don't use AEIOU or something? I don't forgot what it was, but I just remember that about how it's not about the traditional, and that's what's so appealing about modern poetry is that, you can break free from that and do whatever you want. And I think that that is something that's exciting about the Muse moving forward too. And also having teachers like Louisa and Tim, who Tim is retired, but over at ODU is because I think academia has a sense of really keeping you in a box a little bit about don't go too far outside of, you know, him or people we know, that's part of that.
Yeah.
And I think that like pop culture references often are frowned upon, not because of their merit in the poem or their sound or whatever, but just because that's not doesn't belong in poetry. So I love
And
hearing that kind of
I
stuff.
feel like it's like when I hear that, sometimes I feel like it's this unintentional, like, let's homogenize voices in poetry. And it's kind of like, well, that's great and all, but if I didn't see myself in TV, in a movie until West Side Story. I mean, granted,
Mhm.
that's an old movie and it was old when I was young.
Right, right,
But like, if that was the only thing I had, I mean,
right.
something is wrong. And so I feel like I understand where that intention is coming from,
Hmm.
but I also feel like there's this underlying theme of like, it's not white.
Yes.
And I, I want to give the best intentions to people, but I feel like, yeah, there's this feeling of like, well, what do I have to reference if I don't reference that,
Right. Well, also I
Um,
look at it as oh, I'm sorry, keep going.
oh, well, and I feel like pop culture shouldn't be frowned on. It's a great entrance into poetry. And then, getting into poetry, I found all these other writers I hadn't known about. Like,
Hmm.
a latest kick of mine has been Miguel Hernandez, which was, a poet from Spain. So, like, I didn't know about him until, almost 30. Like, that's
Right.
a shame.
Hmm. Well, it's kind of like what's wrong with referencing a modern artist now in something that maybe other readers don't get because but it's okay to reference Lord Tennyson or Alfred Lord
Yeah,
Tennyson.
yeah,
It's like I don't get that reference until you
yeah,
told it to me. So I just think that's really interesting. So I love that adding of reality, and I think it lets you like really do a lot of things, like with satire sometimes or irony and stuff. When you get readers that understand what you're talking about with that, I think
yeah.
that's really awesome. Carol, oh, we have a question. Carolyn, speaking of discovery through poetry, were there any discoveries you made about yourself as a poet and or person while writing the book?
Ooh. Oh, okay. I think I can answer this. I don't know if this
Okay.
is a good answer. I was really excited when I heard the book was going to get published. And then as the time for publication came around, I got like really weirdly depressed. Um, because some of the book feels depressing in a sense of like, oh, I'm just like looking at all these bad moments in my life. And I don't want it to be that. But I remember sitting with, at the time, my therapist, and I was just like kind of talking about like, and I'm such a self-destructive person. And she said, and I will never forget this, I tell it to everyone. She said, what if it's not self-destruction? What if it's self-rescue? And I thought, oh, like, so sometimes this feeling of like feeling unempowered, like disempowered and feeling incapable of speaking out or whatever, all of this destruction really is a form of rescue and a form of asserting power in its own sense. Like, does power always have to be this visceral, like, force, or can power look different? And so I feel like I'm slowly coming to that kind of realization that maybe this isn't a book of like pain, but it's a book of self-rescue. And I'm not romanticizing brokenness. I'm like healing in it. I don't know. That feels a little too, I don't want to say that, but yeah, just kind of reframing the lens of the book for me, that or on a personal level for me, probably is what I've learned in this book.
Yeah, that's amazing. I can see some of that in some of the work too. It's kind of like by breaking down, like even the autopsy book, breaking down that in that way is taking it apart to heal, in a way. I believe that, that's really interesting. I love that idea of like just looking at something like power and asking yourself all the different ways it can be used. Does it have to
Yeah.
be this way or that way? Poetry is a
Yeah,
great way
and
to
and
do
like
that.
and like breaking apart power, is that also not its own kind of act of power?
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. Wow. Good answer. We're getting deep here on a
That
Friday
was a
night,
really good
right?
question. I don't know if I'm that smart for these questions.
Well, I'm going to make a call out for one more question, and then we can probably wrap it up soon if that's okay with you. But I will. I had a question just on the tip of my tongue before I thought of that other question. Oh, yes, it's about sounds. And this is kind of a weird question, but I would love to just go through the process of how the sound of something gets you inspired to write something and how that turns into something else. I know that's crazy, but I always love to hear like just the process of writing the first line of a poem and then it turning into something that's completely different, and it's almost kind of like improv in a way. You start with something, and then if you're, or even the animal imagery that you use, like the starfish, the scorpion, and those kind of things. You were talking about the starfish. There's a certain reason why you're drawn to that kind of stuff. So it's just, I don't know. I know that's a vague question, but if an example of some kind, that would be really awesome.
Yeah, so the sound question, I feel like it's funny because for a poet, I feel like I'm the worst with sound. I feel like people like Nishat. Oh my gosh,
Right.
he's amazing with sound. I feel like I have to work very hard to get sound. And I feel like I did that. I really focused on that in the poem Autopsy of My Mother. But like the animal imagery, a lot of what I was thinking there is like, I think like reframing, like we always look at the scorpion as like this like dangerous, harmful animal, and like what if it's not? And so a lot of the animal imagery is one because I like love animals and I like being outdoors, but also because I, would go outside a lot, but also because I just wanted to think of like the ways in which we project human like qualities on animals and how we misunderstand them through that projection. And just kind of reframing that in a sense, like, is this scorpion like really this dangerous thing? Or is the projection the dangerous thing?
Yeah, that's interesting. It's like putting these assumptions on it. I had a student in my class at ODU write a paper about why people are so afraid of sharks, even though they're responsible for less deaths than bears or something like that. And I think asking that question gives you some room too. There's a lot of question asking. I'm thinking.
Yeah.
That's great. Anyone else have a question out there? Mm-mm-mm. So I think that this is a good moment. I would like to encourage everyone to buy Amanda Gomez's book when it comes out. They're working on it, right? Like it's going to
Yes,
be out
so
soon.
we're finishing the final edits. I think it should be out, and I don't want to say when because I don't know, but it should be out next month.
We'll make sure to reshare this so you can get a copy, but you can pre-order now.
Yes.
Yeah, so pre-order it. It's a wonderful book, and it's more poems that she read tonight, which is awesome. And she's going to be teaching at the Muse, I'm sure. Again, she has a poetry class that has has been successful. How is that going?
It's going really well, actually. I think it's called Poetry of Self-Compassion. And then I told them I'm kind of regretting that title. I almost wish we called it just Writing Self-Compassion or Recovering Self-Compassion.
There you go.
But yeah.
Yeah, and there's that's kind of also a fun thing too when you're coming up with classes. It's like you almost like learn something. You go, I'm going to create a class based on this, and then you learn something in the process of teaching the class too.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. So I feel like it's kind of like giving the gift of yourself to be an artist, to like, yeah, be more self-compassionate to your artist self.
absolutely, we need some self-compassion to our artist selves, right?
Yeah.
But I want to thank you again, Amanda. This was wonderful. Thank you for answering all the questions. I think you did a great job. Thank you for sharing your work with us. And just to let everyone know out there, the Muse Writers Center offers classes and workshops all through the next month or two, and free events. Make sure you check us out at the-muse.org. And also, this will be running again on Facebook and YouTube and the website. So make sure you watch, like, share, and pre-order Amanda's book, because
Thank you.
she wants people to buy it, right? She
Yeah. And
wrote
thanks for the questions, Susan and Carolyn and Sean. Those were like stumpers.
it. Yeah, well, you did a good job. So yeah, questions or something that really sparks a lot of great talk in these kind of things. That's what's so great about poetry. It's not just the words there. We get to talk about it afterwards too.
Yeah.
Like we're in an old-fashioned French salon.
Yeah.
All right, well, thanks again, Amanda, and thanks to
Thank
everybody
you.
for watching.